It's Ash from Super Videos, back for another one. We're back to talk about The Walking Dead and how the very final issue of The Walking Dead's comic book series can be adapted in the TV show universe and what they would need to remix in order for that story to make sense in the TV universe. Now, before we jump into this video, if you have not read the comics, especially the final issue, or if you're a TV show only fan, you may not want to watch this video because it will spoil a lot for you in terms of how the comics ends and what the story is. Now, even if you are not a comic reader, you still don't want to know this because it will most likely be adapted to the TV universe in some way, shape, or form. So this is your official spoiler warning. So with that spoiler warning out of the way, let's jump right into this. I'm gonna actually recap how the final issue goes. So in the final issue, we actually have like a 20-year time jump, and we start the story with Carl Grimes. This is 20 years after Rick is assassinated by Sebastian from the Commonwealth. But when we come back to the story 20 years later with Carl, he's actually not at Alexandria or the Commonwealth. He is living in a farmhouse. It's just him, his wife, and his daughter. And in that issue, he actually tells his daughter the story of Rick Grimes, the story of his father. Now that's a part of it. What also happens in this issue is related to Carl and Herschel Jr. So 20 years after the events of Rick's death, they have evolved to a point where they treat walkers as something very special. People pay to watch walkers because they are very rare and you don't find them easily because most people are in the community, inside the walls, they're safe. So no one really ventures out into the world to see walkers. So people would pay to watch walkers inside the community. It's like a circus in a way. You pay to watch something that's just bizarre and it's hard to come by an ordinary person. It's a similar concept. It's the same kind of concept that they are exploring in The Walking Dead's third spin-off, World Beyond, where the kids have never really seen walkers up close. So through the story, where they go cross-country on a journey, they end up experiencing what it's like to be around walkers and what it's like to have to kill walkers and have to protect themselves. So it's a similar type of concept in the final issue of The Walking Dead's comic book. Now, what ends up happening is one of these walkers escapes the community. This walker belongs to Herschel Jr., Maggie's son. Maggie is actually, at this point, the leader or the president of the Commonwealth. Herschel Jr.'s walker escapes, and this walker happens to show up at Carl Grimes' farmhouse. Carl kills this walker, and that kickstarts a chain of events, puts Carl and Herschel Jr. at odds. Because in this new world, walkers are not just walkers. You don't get to kill someone else's walker. Like if a walker belongs to someone else, if they own it, you can't kill it. That situation where Carl has to kill this walker to protect his family puts Carl and Herschel Jr. at odds with each other. So with that recap out of the way, how can they adapt this to the TV show universe? There's 3 ways they could do it. The first way is to just skip that completely, which I think would be wasted opportunity. So I hope that they don't do that. The second way they could do it is they could do the exact same thing, but replace Judith with Carl. So what I mean by that is in the TV universe, when we get to this point, you can have like a 10-year time jump or 20-year time jump if they want to do it the exact same. And then we have a grown-up Judith Grimes who goes through a similar story with Herschel Jr. Now, Herschel Jr. is not in the story yet. He's probably with Maggie, wherever Maggie is. Now, we don't know whether he's going to be with Maggie when she returns, but for the purpose of this video, for this case, let's assume that he is back in the story. And at this particular time, when Judith Grimes replaces Carl Grimes from the comics, she goes through a similar story as Carl did in the comics. And it's just Judith who's at odds with Herschel Jr. And you could have the story go the same way. Now, I think it makes perfect sense for them to do exactly that. But there's a third way that they could do it. The third way that they could do it is they could replace not just Carl with Judith, but they could also replace Herschel Jr. with someone else. Now, who could that be? in the TV show universe, they've done something very clever, which they didn't do in the comics. They have kids whose parents used to be a member of the ex-enemies that they had to fight off. For example, Gracie. She's the child of an ex-savior who Rick Grimes killed in the TV universe. Adam is the child of an ex-Whisperer who died during the Whisper arc. Now, these characters have integrated into the communities, and Gracie and Adam are part of the community. They're both Alexandrians. So what you could potentially do is replace Herschel Jr. during the story with, let's say, Gracie or Adam, and you can have the story play out that way, which I think would be pretty interesting, especially if it's Gracie and Judith. But if they want to keep that part of the story because it's sort of iconic, then they would have to go with the first scenario. Now, there's another way they could do it, but it would take away a lot from the original story, and that would be to replace both Judith and Herschel with Gracie and Adam. So you have two characters whose parents used to be ex-enemies, but one has turned out to be good and one has turned out to be a bad person, just like their parents. So if you want to make the story unique and powerful, you could do that, but it does take away from what the original story was. Now, in terms of my own opinions, I think that they're probably gonna keep the story the same and just replace Carl with Judith and possibly replace Herschel with either Gracie or Adam. But I don't think that they're gonna necessarily completely redo the entire story for the TV show universe, because it was such an iconic story in the final issue of the comic book series. But with that said, I am interested to know everyone's thoughts and opinions about these theories. How do you think they're gonna adapt the final issue of the comic book series in the TV universe? And do you think that there's a possibility that they could completely remix it in order for the story to be fresh and unique and for it to be more powerful than how it went down in the comic book? So let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section below. That's it for this video. See you next time for another super video.